Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind was sharp on the edge of the Bighorn Mountains, and the ground still held the chill of early spring. But the sun had finally broken through. It glinted off the iron chains that dragged behind Loretta Norring's ankles as she ran. She did not look back. She had already seen too much faces of men who bought and sold women like cattle, the bone-white teeth of one who had laughed when she screamed, the way the wagon creaked as it rolled through the night. She had waited until their guard passed out drunk beside the fire. Then she'd broken the wagon lock with the edge of a rusted horseshoe and slipped into the wild. Now her feet bled, and her dress was torn at the thigh, but her hands were free. That mattered more. The slope was steep and rocky. She stumbled, caught herself, and kept going. The slavers would be awake by now. They would follow. She had maybe an hour. Loretta's lungs burned by the time she reached a narrow creek that cut through the trees. She dropped beside it, cupped water to her lips, then yanked at the chains around her ankles. They would slow her. She needed something to break them. She heard the horse before she saw it. A low grunt, the clop of hooves on rock. Loretta scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. A man came around the bend, tall in the saddle, rifle slung across his back. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, and his hat was pulled low against the sun. He had a rough look, dust and stubble, and the kind of silence that made her tense. She backed up a step. He did not move closer. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low and steady. Loretta's mouth was dry. I got away. Chains. I need something to cut them." He dismounted slowly, hands raised in plain sight. "My name's Silas Lorne. I'm not with them." She did not answer. "I've got bolt cutters in my saddlebag," he said. "Let me help you." She hesitated. The creek ran behind her. Deep woods on either side. She had nowhere else to go. "Fine," she said. "But if you try anything, I will not," he said simply. He knelt beside her. She flinched when his fingers brushed her ankle, but he did not touch her skin again. He worked fast, mouth tight, brow drawn. The cutters snapped once, twice, and the chains fell away. Loretta let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Silas stood and offered her a canteen. "What is your name?" "Loretta Norring." "You alone?" She nodded. They had others, but I was the only one small enough to fit through the wagon bars. His jaw tensed. "How many of them?" "5, maybe 6. They kept moving camp. Never stayed in one place long." Silas looked toward the hills. "They will come looking." "I know. You can ride." "Enough." He helped her onto his horse, then climbed on behind, careful not to press too close. "My place is half a day out. You will be safe there." Loretta did not reply. She let her head tip forward as the horse started, exhaustion pressing at the edges of her sight. They rode until the sun dipped low behind the trees. Silas's cabin sat in a narrow valley, tucked between tall pines. It was simple, a porch, a wood pile, smoke curling from the chimney. He slid off the saddle and helped her down. "There's warm water inside," he said. "I will bring food." She stepped over the threshold and paused. The cabin smelled of pine and tobacco, but it was clean. There were folded blankets by the hearth and a rifle over the mantel. She crossed to the basin and washed the blood from her feet. Silas returned with a bowl of stew. She ate on the floor, legs tucked close, watching him. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Used to drive cattle. Got tired of sleeping in dirt and watching men die over nothing." Loretta looked toward the fire. "I was taken near Cheyenne. I was headed to visit my cousin. I never made it." "I am sorry," he said. "But you are safe now." She looked up at him. "Why help me?" He met her eyes. "Because no one helped my sister. She was taken in Missouri. We never found her." Loretta's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands. "I can take you to town tomorrow," Silas said. "If you want to go." "Do you think they will be looking for me there?" He paused. "Maybe. Then I will stay. For now." He nodded once. "You can take the bed. I will sleep by the fire." I will not touch you, he said, firm. You have my word. Loretta studied his face. Rough, sun-lined, but steady. She believed him. That night, as the wind curled outside and the fire crackled low, she lay awake, watching the shape of him in the chair by the hearth. He had not removed his boots. When morning came, Silas made coffee and fried potatoes. Loretta ate in silence. Her body ached, but she felt stronger. Silas cleared the plates. I need to ride out, check the Westridge. You can stay here. There is a pistol under the bed, should you need it. She gave a slow nod. Thank you. When he left, Loretta walked the edge of the porch, breathing in the pine air. Her hands no longer trembled. She was not healed, she knew that, but she was standing. Silas returned at dusk. His eyes scanned the tree line before settling on her. No sign of them, he said. Good. He tied his horse. We will keep watch tonight, just in case. Later, as they sat by the fire, she asked, Did you ever try to find her? Your sister. He nodded. For 2 years. Then the trail went cold. I am sorry. He looked at her. You remind me of her. She was never afraid to fight. I was terrified. But you still ran. She looked down at her hands. I did. I will keep you safe, Loretta. Something in his voice made her chest ache. She nodded once. I believe you. He did not smile, but his eyes softened. She watched him as he banked the fire, as he folded her blanket, as he placed the pistol near her reach before settling into the chair again. She fell asleep to the sound of his breath, steady and close. And for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of chains. The valley held to its quiet even as the sky pressed low with a bank of thick gray cloud. By mid-morning, the first heavy drops began to fall, slow and cold, tapping against the cabin roof. Loretta stood near the window, arms folded, watching the soft curve of the ridge disappear behind the rain. Silas was out again, checking the trap lines before weather made travel worse. He had left before light, quiet-footed, his coat collar turned high. Inside, the cabin held a hush made deeper by the storm. She lit a lantern and set about cleaning the tin plates from breakfast, her fingers still tender but steady. The ache in her legs had eased. The bruises too, though they purpled dark along her ribs. She moved carefully like a woman relearning her own body. Toward afternoon, hoofbeats broke the quiet. She stepped to the door, pistol in hand, thumb on the hammer. When Silas rode into view, she let out a breath and lowered the weapon. He was soaked through, his hat brim dripping, but he met her gaze through the downpour. You're early, she said, holding the door for him. Storms turning worse, he replied, pulling off his coat. Creeks rising fast. Might be 2 days before it's safe to cross again. She took the wet coat and hung it near the hearth. Any trouble? He shook his head and crouched beside the fire to unlace his boots. Saw tracks west of the ridge. Not fresh. Could have been trappers passing through. Or not, she said. He looked up at her. We'll stay close in. She nodded, then stepped back to the stove. There's coffee. I kept it warm. He poured a mug and sat at the table, steam curling from the tin rim. Did your family farm? He asked after a moment. No, she said. My father was a schoolman. Taught letters and scripture in a church with a leaky roof. He tilted his head. You read then? Of course. Right? Better than most men I've met. He smiled at that, just slightly. She leaned against the table's edge. And you, Silas Lorne? What did you want before cattle and cabins? He seemed to weigh the question before answering. I wanted to build something that wouldn't get swallowed up by dust and war. Turns out, that's harder than it sounds. She looked toward the rafters. I think I understand that. He stood and reached for a dry towel. There's an old barn behind the rise. I can show you tomorrow if the rain lets up. It's not much, but it's strong. Shelter for horses. Maybe more. What more? He paused. The kind of place someone could choose to stay. Her brow lifted. Are you offering? I'm saying, he said slowly. You don't owe the road anything more than it's already taken. She studied his face creased from wind and sun, mouth drawn at the corners, but eyes open. He wasn't trying to convince her of anything, just laying something down for her to pick up, if she wanted. I don't know what I want yet, she said. That's fair. Later, she peeled potatoes while he repaired a loose shutter. The wind had picked up, and the wood groaned under it. But she liked the sound of him hammering just outside. It felt like something solid pushing back against the storm. By nightfall, the rain had eased into a steady patter. Loretta stood in the doorway watching the lantern light flicker over puddles in the yard. Silas came up behind her, his hand brushing close to hers but not quite touching. "Cold?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just needed air." He stepped outside and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder beneath the porch roof. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "But now I don't see the sense in running from quiet." She glanced at him. "You think quiet's enough?" He met her eyes. "When it's shared, maybe." They stood like that for a long while, the sounds of rain and wind between them. Nothing hurried, nothing forced. Inside, she set out 2 blankets on the floor again, though her body leaned toward the warmth of the bed. When he moved to take the chair, she hesitated. "You don't have to sleep upright," she said. His brow lifted. "There's space on the floor," she added, then turned away to poke at the fire. He settled down a few feet from her, wrapped in his coat. In the dark, her voice came soft. "I don't know how to be with someone. Not really." "You don't have to," he replied. "Not tonight." She curled onto her side, facing him. "But maybe someday." He didn't speak, but she heard the shift of his breath, steady and close. Not a promise, not yet, but something waiting, and that was enough. The rain didn't let up for 2 more days. It softened the edges of the world outside, turned the clay paths to muck and the tall grass to a bent shimmer beneath the weight of water. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Loretta stitched a tear in the hem of her petticoat, while Silas carved a new handle for his skinning knife. They spoke little, but the quiet between them had changed, no longer edged with caution. It rested easier now, like shared breath. On the 3rd morning, the sun climbed back across the sky. The ground steamed and the pine needles glistened. Loretta followed Silas out past the cabin, down a slope thick with ferns. He carried a canvas sack over one shoulder. She carried nothing, but he hadn't offered her work, and she hadn't asked. At the bottom of the slope, a fence ran in a wide arc around a field that had once been tilled. The barn sat near the far end, weathered but standing square, its beams dark with age and storms. "It could hold 6 head," he said, stepping inside. "Maybe more if they're small stock." She touched one of the beams. "Why didn't you keep cattle?" "Price of feed went up too sharp last winter. Sold off the last of them to a man in Buffalo." She moved through the open space, her boots scuffing dust and old straw. "You ever think about building something else?" she asked. "Like? A place for people." He leaned beside the door. "You thinking of running a boarding house out here?" "No," she said. "I'm thinking maybe there's women like me. Ones who get away but got nowhere to land." His mouth pulled tight, not with disapproval, but thought. "You'd shelter them?" "If I could." He nodded once. "You'd need steady food. A clean well. Blankets. A safe place to sleep." "I'd need someone who could build a second cabin," she added. He looked at her, eyes steady. "You'd have that." They walked back up together, and for the first time she reached for his arm when her foot slipped in the mud. He didn't speak, just steadied her and kept walking. That evening she set her sewing aside and watched him sharpen a chisel by the hearth. "You were married before?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not close." "You didn't want it?" "I never found someone who made stillness feel like a gift instead of a cage." She drew her knees up under her skirt. "I never had the chance to choose anyone." He set the chisel down and met her gaze. "You have that now." Outside, the last of the water dripped from the eaves. "I don't want to go back east," she said. "Even if it's safer. I wouldn't ask you to." She stood, crossed the room, and sat on the floor across from him, the fire between them. "I don't know if I'm the kind of woman who can build a life from ash," she said. "You already did," he replied. She looked down at her hands. "I still wake up braced for pain." "I know." I don't want to be looked at like I'm broken. He didn't move closer. Then I'll look at you like you're firewood. Scarred, but strong. Need it? She let out a slow breath. You always talk like the land. He leaned his forearms on his knees. It's the only thing that ever taught me how to stay. Silas didn't ask her for anything, not even then. But when she laid a blanket out beside his that night instead of across the room, he didn't shift away. And when the firelight flickered against her face and she whispered, I want to try, he only nodded and reached for her hand. His touch was gentle but sure. The mountains stood quiet outside, and for the first time since she'd run, Loretta didn't feel like she was waiting for something to catch her. She was still. And she was safe. The snow came early that year. Not heavy, but enough to dust the pine needles and settle in the hollows where deer bedded down. Loretta woke to the sight of it through the cabin window, pale light catching on the glass. She sat up slowly, her body still stiff from sleep, and pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Silas was already outside, cutting firewood with slow, steady swings. She watched him from the doorway, the way he paused between strokes to glance toward the tree line. He hadn't spoken of the men who'd taken her in nearly a week, but his eyes still lingered on the horizon like a man waiting for trouble to shape itself from the quiet. She pulled on her boots and stepped out into the cold. You planning to chop through the whole mountain? He stopped mid-swing, the axe head buried clean in the log. Figure we'll need more once the snow sets in proper. I could help. You'll need gloves, he said, nodding toward the porch rail. And a better coat. She fetched both, then joined him by the stump. He handed her the hatchet without a word. The wood split clean under her first strike, and he gave a short nod of approval. You ever build with timber? She asked, lining up another log. Some. Helped put up a church roof once, out near Laramie. Why? If we're going to take in others, she said, that barn won't hold through a hard winter without reinforcement. He adjusted his grip on the axe. I've got cedar and fir stacked behind the lean-to. If we start now, we could frame a bunkhouse before the deep cold. She looked up. You think I'd let you do it alone? She didn't answer, but her mouth pulled into something half between gratitude and disbelief. They worked until midday, then sat on the porch, steam rising from their shoulders. She passed him a tin of cornbread, and they ate in silence, watching the snow melt in slow rivulets down the slope. You ever think about what comes after? She asked suddenly. When it's not just surviving anymore? He picked at a splinter in his palm. You mean a future? I mean something with shape, with roots. He didn't look at her, but his voice was steady. I've thought about building a mill. The creek's strong enough. Could grind grain for trade. She turned toward him. That's not what I meant. He set the cornbread down. Then say it plain. I want to stay, she said. But not as a guest. Not as something passing through. His jaw shifted, the only sign of emotion. You'd stay as what then? She pulled her knees up, arms wrapped around them. As your wife. He looked up sharply, not in surprise but in the way a man steadies himself before stepping onto thin ice. You're sure? I don't want to take your name because I owe you safety. I want it because I trust you more than I ever thought I'd trust anyone again. He stood slowly, stepped down from the porch, then turned to face her. There's no preacher for miles. I don't need one, she said. Not if you say it and mean it. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a ring. Simple silver, worn at the edges. It was my mother's. I kept it because I thought maybe one day. She stood and held out her hand. He slipped it on her finger, calloused fingers brushing against hers. I vow, he said, voice low but clear, to build something with you that won't break under the weight of this world. She swallowed hard. And I vow to stand with you, not behind or beneath. Beside. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He only took her hand and held it between both of his, like something worth guarding. That night, she moved her things into the bed without asking. He didn't comment, just folded his coat over the chair and banked the fire like he always did. When the wind howled through the trees and the shutters creaked against the frame, they lay side by side in the dark, their hands clasped between them. And when she finally closed her eyes, she did so knowing that nothing waited in the dark but the slow, steady breath of the man who had given her choice instead of chains. The snow held steady through December, not deep enough to trap them in the valley, but enough to slow their steps and hush the woods around the homestead. Loretta moved through the days with a quiet steadiness, her hands learning the rhythm of life that didn't depend on fear or flight. She learned the weight of firewood in her arms, the pace of a mule across frozen ground, the small repairs that came with keeping the cabin warm and dry. Silas finished the timber framing by New Year's Eve. The bunkhouse stood square and bare, with rough-hewn walls and a clean roof of cedar shakes. They didn't speak of who might sleep there come spring, but the cot frames were already stacked along the back wall, and Loretta had begun sewing mattress ticking from spare bolts of cloth kept in a sealed chest under the bed. One morning, while she was mending a torn scarf, Silas set a small parcel on the table. "I traded for this with that trapper who passed through last week," he said, brushing snow from his coat sleeve. "Figured you'd make better use of it than me." She opened the paper to find a leather-bound ledger, blank and lined. The pages were thick and clean, ready for ink. "I thought you might want to keep record," he added, "in case this place grows the way you've been thinking." "I will," she said, running her fingers down the seam. "Thank you." He poured 2 cups of chicory and sat across from her. "How far do you want this to go, Loretta?" "What do you mean?" "This place. The women you want to help. The ones who might come if word reaches them." She folded the paper neatly and looked up. "As far as it needs to. I don't want to turn anyone away because we weren't prepared." He held her gaze. "Then we'll need more than strong walls. We'll need names on paper, land claims, township records. You want it to last, you'll need to make it known." "I've written petitions before," she said. "Back in Illinois. I can draft a letter to the territorial office. Start the process. You'll need to sign it as the landowner's wife." "I will." He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "You're not afraid of what it might bring?" "I've already survived worse than a government clerk with too many questions." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His thumb traced the worn edge of her knuckle, not to comfort her, but as if grounding himself. That night, they laid together without words. His arm around her waist, her breath steady against his chest. The fire burned down slow, and neither of them moved. By late February, a wagon arrived at the edge of the valley. A woman stepped down, wrapped in wool, her boy clinging to her skirts. She didn't speak much English, but Loretta took her hand and led her inside. The woman's name was Alina, and she'd come from a mining camp near Rawlins, where men drank hard and women disappeared without fuss or notice. Loretta gave her the cot nearest the stove and taught her how to boil water with dried yarrow. Later that week, Alina helped frame the makeshift kitchen shelves, and her boy followed Silas around like a shadow, watching him chop wood and oil leather. By April, there were 5 women in the bunkhouse and 3 children. Silas added a second stove, and Loretta filed the first official papers with the territorial office, listing the land under the name Lorne Homestead and the purpose as mutual refuge. One afternoon, as she stood near the edge of the clearing, watching the youngest child chase the hens toward the coop, Silas joined her, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You ever think you'd be here?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I've stopped trying to guess where I'll end up. I'd rather just build where I stand." He nodded once. "You've made something here. So have you." He turned to her then, not hurried, not expectant. "Loretta." "Yes. I'd like to take you to the courthouse in Buffalo. Make this marriage legal by law, not just by vow." She studied his face. "You think we need a paper to prove what we already know?" "No," he said, "but I want the world to know it too." She took his hand. "Then we'll go. When the spring rains pass." They made the trip in May with 2 mules and a borrowed cart. The courthouse clerk was young and slow with the ink, but he read the lines careful, and when he handed over the certificate, Loretta traced her name in full, her handwriting sharp and even. They returned home to blooming dogwood and the smell of fresh earth. Alina baked a cake with dried apples and molasses. The children gathered wildflowers and tied them with twine. That night, as the lanterns burned low and the others drifted to sleep, Loretta and Silas sat on the porch watching the stars rise over the ridgeline. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "We did this," she said, together. "We did. I think," she said, "this is what peace feels like." He kissed her temple, slow and quiet. "It's what love feels like, too." And they stayed there until the first light broke over the trees, the land quiet and theirs, the weight of the past behind them, and every breath ahead full of promise.